So I know it's hard to believe, but people are not always responsible. They don't always make the best choices, even when they make mistakes, when they err, even when they break the law. They don't take responsibility. And all you have to do is Google "take responsibility," and you'll get some unbelievable examples. Like in Norwich, England, make the Brits here today feel comfortable, although this is a kind of an uncomfortable scenario. Police recently arrested a man, David Secker, 34, who was allegedly steering his car, driving with his knees while talking on a cell phone and texting the other phone. And when he was pulled over, he had the chutzpah, which I love, to say to the cops to wait until I'm done talking. And then he proceeded to fight this in court as if somehow he wasn't responsible. It was the people who were calling him and texting him, and what choice did he have? He had to answer while driving. Another cell phone example of not taking responsibility, a young couple recently received a bill for $200 in iPhone app downloads, but they didn't want to take responsibility. It wasn't their fault. Why? Because they said their 20-month-old daughter got a hold of their password and put it in 200 times and downloaded 200 apps. Why should they pay? It's not their fault. A while back, maybe you saw this, a man sued Anheuser-Busch Budweiser. Why? Because after years spent investing into their beer, right, to drink it, to consume it, he had emotional damage and physical damage and all kinds of damage because the advertisements weren't true. He didn't win the attention of the opposite sex. It was obviously thrown out of court very quickly. In Pennsylvania, these are all true stories, you can't make this stuff up. A grad student, Megan Thode, was very displeased when she received in her final class in grad school a C+, which she believed was worth $1.6 million because it kept her from getting that job that she would have gotten if she had gotten a B minus. This is actually being played out in court right now. It's hard to believe. A man got a dry cleaning bill after he had dropped off his suit for his first day of work. He got the bill back, and actually they didn't have the suit that he had dropped off, so he decided to sue them. The suit was worth like $500, but it actually went to court for $67 million. Why? Because he was suing them. It took 10 years, and during this time, he believed he was owed emotional damages, and he had to rent a car for those 10 years to drive to a different dry cleaner because he didn't trust this dry cleaner. The man was also, by the way, a judge who actually took this to court. It was eventually thrown out, and he was thrown off the bench. There is justice. And last but not least, Blame Someone Else Day. Do you know about Blame Someone Else Day? It's the first Friday the 13th of every year, and it supposedly goes back to a woman in Clio, Michigan, who in 1982, on Friday the 13th, I think it was January, she didn't wake up because her alarm clock didn't go off. She didn't wake up in time. She woke up, and she was late to her appointments all day long. So supposedly she created Blame Someone Else Day, that this was the day that you could blame other people for your mistakes, at least according to blamesomeoneelseday.com. That's how the story goes, that she didn't really want to own that particular creation. And in fact, it says, if you ask anyone, they'll probably tell you on blamesomeoneelse.com, somebody else invented this day. But the truth is Blame Someone Else Day wasn't invented in 1982. It was invented 3,500 years ago in the desert on this day when we read this Torah portion, Shalach Lecha. Because if you read this week's Torah portion, or if you were listening or studying in the other room, you read about the spies, the 12 spies. 2 of them come back with a very beautiful and positive message and report. Joshua and Caleb. Right before there was President Barack Obama, there was Joshua and Caleb who said, Anachnu nechala. Right? Yes, we can. That was the message. And it was a worthy message. And it was a worthy message then and now. Yes, we can. But it wasn't the only message. As Eli shared, sometimes the glass is half full. Or the other 10 spies, sometimes the glass is half empty. The 10 spies who came back had a negative report, the other 10, besides Joshua and Caleb, and they said the following: Moses, we came to the land which you sent us, and true enough, it's flowing with milk and honey. However, the people who inhabit this land, they are too mighty. The cities are too big and fortified. Their offspring are like giants. We are unable to go up and take this land. Their report spread panic and chaos and pandemonium throughout the camp, and the entire congregation started raising their voices and shouting out and weeping. And it says they complained once again against Moses and Aaron, saying, "If only we had died in the land of Egypt. If only we had died in the desert. Why did God bring us out here to finally fall by the sword? We want to return to Egypt. We want to go home." It sounds like a summer vacation family trip gone wrong. We've all been on that trip. I haven't, because my kids are right here, but I'm sure you have. Kids in the back seat saying, "Are we there yet? We don't want to be going. We don't want to do this. Please, we want to go home." Why do you think we called them B'nai Yisrael, the children of Israel? Because that's how they acted, like children thousands of years ago. We can't do this. We don't want to do this. It's too big for us. It's not possible. Moses, it's your fault. God, it's your fault. Our people have been blaming other people since the beginning of time. If you look at Adam and Eve, this is exactly what happened to them. He didn't do it. She didn't do it. The snake didn't do it. Nobody ate from the tree. It wasn't their fault if they did, right? Blame someone else day. Thousands of years ago, and almost every day since. The mantra of childhood: he made me do it, she made me do it, it's his fault, it's her fault, it's not my fault. Nothing has changed. We're more educated, we're more sophisticated, we're more modern, and yet in many ways, it's gotten worse. Because now we can have frivolous lawsuits, and now there's a million things and places you can place your blame. You blame it on guns, you blame it on religion, we blame it on secular society, we blame it on clinical labels, ADD, PTSD, MICKEY, MOUSC, the list goes on and on. There's no shortage of acronyms and labels and places to place our blame. Yesterday, I was at Atomic Cafe. I know it's hard to believe. I was there, as usual, and I was sitting there, and a man comes in, and he's in a huff, and he's in a puff, and he's in a bad mood, and he's telling everybody in this small little cafe. Why was he in a bad mood? Because it was so hot yesterday. 4 days prior, I'm at Stop and Shop picking something up. I'm in aisle 2. A woman comes around the corner in her cart, almost takes off my leg. Right? She doesn't say anything. She mumbles. She grumbles like it's my fault for just being there. I see her in aisle 3, 5, 7. I think it was the kippah. Just wore her down because she finally said, "I'm so sorry for nearly amputating your leg and near the cheese puffs in aisle 2, right? I don't know why I'm just in such a bad mood because of the cold, because of the rain. And in a spectrum of 3-4 days, people were blaming it on the sun. They're blaming it on the rain. I feel like Milli Vanilli. I could break out in a song right now, blame it on the rain. But it wasn't their fault either, right? They were lip syncing, right? Nobody wants to own anything. Everybody wants to blame it on the sun, blame it on the rain, blame it on external circumstances. But that's the problem. You can't grow up if you're always blaming it on the rain, blaming it on other people, blaming your decisions, your responsibility on other people. John Paul Sartre said, "Man is condemned to be free because once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does." And Eleanor Roosevelt said, "In the long run, we shape our lives and we shape ourselves. The process never ends until we die, and the choices we make are ultimately our own responsibility and nobody else's." And these two people knew what they were talking about. They both battled with life's darkness, depression, and yet they took responsibility and they created their lives. But that's what great men and women do. No matter what obstacles they are facing, they take responsibility. This is what the children in the desert needed to do. It's what our children need to do. It's what all of us need to do. We need to heed the words of Rudyard Kipling, right? The great British writer and poet. You're wondering, how many times can the rabbi pander to the Brits in the audience? I guess a lot. But he's a great poet. This is the greatest poem, in my opinion, in the history of poetry. It's called If. And he wrote it inspired after a very devastating war. In the midst of the Boer War, as the Brits were fighting in Africa, there was a failed military action led by Leander Starr Jameson. And Jameson shouldn't have led this military action. It actually wasn't his fault, but he took total responsibility, and there were lives that were lost in this military action. Kipling was so inspired by Jameson's willingness to take on responsibility that he sat down in 1896, I believe it was, and wrote the poem If. And he also wrote it and delivered it to his son John on John's 12th birthday. And he said to his son John the following, "Son, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself, son, when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too. If you can wait and not be tired of waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, son, and yet don't look too good nor talk too wise. Son, if you can dream and make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same, if you can bear to hear the truths you have spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, or watch the things you have given your life to broken and stop and build them up with worn-out tools, if you can make one heap of all your winnings at risk and one turn of the game pitch and toss and lose and start again at your beginnings and never breathe a word about your loss. Son, if you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they are gone, and so hold on when there's nothing in you except the will which says hold on. If you can walk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings, never lose the common touch. If neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you, but none too much. If you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son." Almost overnight, this poem became a sensation because it's a tribute to the greatest of human virtues, staying composed under stress, retaining humility when you're victorious, never despairing when there's defeat, always retaining authenticity and honor, but above all else, owning your role, your voice, your choice, taking responsibility for what you do, for what you are, and for what you have or have not become. Sadly, a couple years after he wrote this, his son John went to war and was killed. Kipling had no idea at the time he wrote this, but this would be the poem that would get him through the darkness that most of us can only imagine in life. In fact, these words are so important that they are to this day inscribed at Wimbledon. One more for the Brits. Right above center court, these words hang, and these words should hang there, and they should be inscribed not only at Wimbledon, but in our hearts and in our lives. We must teach these words to our children, to the young men and women around us, to communities, to this country, to the society that we are creating, to take responsibility, to own our choices, to take credit not just for the successes, but our failures, to take responsibility not just for our achievements, but also for our mistakes. And we have a lot of mistakes. The economy and mistakes, the environment and mistakes, education and mistakes, the mistakes we are handling, world dictatorships and terrorist threats and anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, cultural, societal ills, the list goes on and on. There's no shortage of mistakes. Yes, we need the mantra of Joshua and Caleb. Yes, we can. But first, it begins with stopping and standing where we are and changing who we are. The world was never changed by a community, by a group, with political slogans or tikkun olam mantras. The world was only changed when groups came along and owned their choices as a group, as a people, and as individuals. I'll end with this. It's been said that the line between childhood and adulthood is crossed when we move from saying, "It got lost," to "I lost it." If you can move from "it got lost" to "I lost it," if you can take the blame even when it's not yours, if you can learn to say, "It wasn't his fault, it wasn't her fault, it wasn't their fault, it was my fault," if you can stop pointing fingers at other people and start pointing fingers at yourself, if you can give credit to others for successes and take responsibility for failures, if you can take responsibility for what you've done, for what you are not, for what you have or have not become, then you will truly fix the earth, fix the world, fix everything that is in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, you'll be a woman, my daughter, my son. Shabbat shalom.